Great, thank you, Kim, and thanks to everybody for attending this afternoon. I feel somewhat privileged to have a slightly later start. Some might call it unconventional even, bending the rules of our forum this afternoon. I would like to discuss knowing the immediate and longer term indicators of an effective online learning culture. And it pleased me to see earlier in our keynote that culture eats strategy for lunch, or was it breakfast? Because I think culture's really where we're going with this, and for educators moving into the online teaching spaces, hopefully you can take away some culture. These just aren't piecemeal strategies that you implement and then look for results. We're looking at something a bit more holistic here, at least I hope. And this is just reiterating the title. So our track here is Understanding Online Learning. And to repeat myself, targeting the immediate and longer term indicators. So things to look for when you're managing online culture for effective online learning. Now, as a caveat, while I work as an ELA for Swinburne Online, this is based on my own research in collaboration with a colleague at La Trobe, and this does not necessarily represent Swinburne Online's position, although I do use these strategies myself in the teaching. So you will see some takeaways and some cultural position to take away from this for your own teaching. Now, if you're in admin, there's also some signals to look out for. So this isn't just pitched at the people at the coal front. You might also use some of these ideas to be gauging and monitoring staff. For students, do we have any students in the room? No. So, yes, 2. Thank you. So our student representation's grown. Yesterday, I think we had 2. Great to see 2 students here. I'll be picking on both of you later, all right? Now, in the plenary, we learned that email is passé. It's finished. I'd like to start by asking the audience who this gentleman is. Excellent. Mr. Swinburne. And his first name? George Swinburne. And it's important that we reflect now toward the end of the conference on what we're really all about here at Swinburne. And that is, namely, being a university of technology. So I was engaged in a crowdsourcing project, and I have part of the extract here of George Swinburne's lovely cursive script. Despite the style, most of this crowdsourcing enterprise, and I want to get on to collaborative learning later, without which I would have been stuck mostly at the date. So you can see here the 3rd of Feb, 1883, 82 actually. So we're crowdsourcing already. Whenever a participant had trouble identifying, I think I went well on the ampersand also, if we can find some of those in there. Needless to say, I wasn't an overly confident or effective participant in this project, but it did get me started. It got me engaged in the Swinburne community, and I was evoked or provoked into this through the email. And the outcome of this is that his diaries from the early to mid 1880s have been fully transcribed. And this actually gave me a good teaching story to explain to the community, because as you know, teaching is not the most exciting topic. Has anybody been at a dinner party and told the guest that you're a teacher? My wife's a paramedic, so she has far more exciting stories to tell, and she usually eclipses my stories. However, this particular research project did pique our bishop at St Kilian's in Bendigo, because he said, I haven't heard anybody talk about transcription for a long time. Now, the interesting part is this research, the transcription was happening from digital. George Swinburne's diary was scanned digitally, and then we were transcribing on the computer into Word for record. So a background on online learning, and this is part of the impetus for why I'm presenting today. The online learning has actually been with us for a while. It involves both distant and networked learning variants of distributed learning, but both have antecedent. And variously through the conference, we've heard a bit about these. So in the Australian milieu, for many students living in the outback, we've had that use of radio. So students have been able to engage with their teachers via the distance communication, and the evolution, of course, where the course materials became online since the 1980s on campus networks. So we've discussed these fairly thoroughly, and here's a picture of the Alice Springs School of the Air, where remote students are using the radio as a means of facilitating distance education. So full integration of the internet platform in our households has allowed distributed learning to evolve in reach, interactivity, openness, capacity, and now we offer entire degrees online. Putting yourself into two agencies here, imagine that this person here is the student for a moment. Now, how might you engage this student? You might not have the face-to-face as the picture version has. Imagine there's a text format. What could you write? And you don't need to answer immediately, but what could you write to promote that student into answering, into discussing? Because learning is not just about a closed system of questions. That's at the basic level. We also need, as teachers, to promote open questioning and detailed answers. Then think of yourself as a staff member. What can I do? But also in the same breath, there's economy of doing. What can I not do? And space my action to also prompt the student to participate. So how do we know when online learning is effective? The image of the rowing team it's metaphorical, because as an online educator, I sometimes like to see myself as the coach, sitting back on the raft doing not much at all. You know, I'm there screaming at the students, and hopefully they coordinate themselves into an action that gets them closer to their goals. Okay? So it looks a little bit chaotic, but what we have out of that is order. So there's 4 features of effective online learning, and to outline from previous research: constructive, cumulative, situated, and collaborative learning. And I just want to detail these to you, because these approaches are part of the culture that you can start promoting. So constructive learning, where we like to contrast constructive learning with the tabula rasa viewpoint of learning, which was the student is a blank canvas and the teacher is the wizard or harbinger of all knowledge. and they're literally writing onto that blank canvas. In the constructivist view, we actually say, well, no, students do come with prior knowledge, and drawing out that prior knowledge is part of your role as an online educator. The constructive view of learning goes on to explain that scaffolding, so we then take the student's prior knowledge and build on it. Cumulative learning is where we start from that point where the student's at and build their knowledge toward the goal. It's important to recognise given learners sometimes are afflicted with misconceptions. In economics, for example, which I teach at Swinburne online, one of the students had, and for those of you familiar with economic theory, supply going down to the right and demand going up to the left. And I said, if you were one of Jean-Baptiste Say's 18th century students, you could be correct because supply creates its own demand. But we have to correct these misconceptions, and the way we do that needs to be proactive. What am I getting at? I didn't tell the student they were wrong. It's unproductive to flat out tell students such. So the situated view of learning is where the learner is in the environment. The learning takes on physical elements. What comes to mind is when the Roman scholars would carry rosemary in above their ear. It was to stimulate the memory. So I always like to encourage students to, after an online Collaborate session, to go and make a cuppa or a coffee and revise and put an asterisk beside the concepts they're having trouble with. That needs to happen immediately. They all sigh and say, really, you want us to study after learning? And the situated view of learning grows into social practice, and this gets us back to our rowing metaphor, where the student community starts to construct their own networks and share information. And an example of this is the dreaded Facebook, where of course students are sharing, dare I say it, hints, perhaps. I'm not sure if our students in the audience have had any experience with that. I'd already graduated by the time Facebook was popular, but I'm sure there's a bit of collaborative learning going on there. How we control that. Now, online learning becomes effective when we understand what the goals and productivity measures can be. So they can be measurable by data, or you can simply look at how you participate in the culture. This is a more immediate indicator of your success as a teacher. So nurturing communication with your students needs to take precedent, and understanding that learning is ongoing. I'm just aware of time. For many students, feedback's a motivator. Personalisation of feedback is critical, pointing out the areas for improvement and actually using the student's name on feedback. We also have the ways in which technology is changing the behaviours and pedagogies of the instructor. Is it just reading materials, or how do students actually engage with this information? So some of the indicators I use are peer-to-peer observations of teaching, the student reviews of teaching, explicit feedback on areas done well, sharing of feedback, and also driving the dialogue towards reflection. And our paper explores how the teaching practices evolve with this, and how online facilitators actually develop rapport. From taking that situated view of learning on, we need to understand what's really going on. Are we just a face on a monitor, or are we actually developing a relationship there? And some of the means for this are by sharing stories And I know this was canned in the plenary, learning styles don't exist. But learning styles are a good metacognitive framework for students. They're a starting point. I always like to ask students, how and when do you learn best? Personalised emails, dropping in, how are you going? Extension activities, takeaways, prompt follow-ups. Here's the Nike swoosh, the tick for economics. But I like to give students takeaways that they can use, be it in other units or in the workplace. How teachers relate to their students in developing the bigger picture, and micro-teaching to overcome misunderstandings. In addition to the constructive learning, teachers, we recommend, should also attend and meet students at exams where possible, graduation attendance, LinkedIn recommendations, helping students for their job search, acting as a student referee, and the digital medium can equal real world outcomes. Can anybody name this person? The academic. Linda Christensen, very good. You guys know Swinburne quite well. So in summary, and I realise I've gone over time unfortunately, sharing stories is the key here. Once you get students to share their stories, we find on Blackboard in the collaborative spaces, they then become champions and post more regularly. And then they look forward to seeing you outside of the online space, which is included for me personally, the exams, the graduations and cafe catch-ups also. Late September, I'm catching up with some more students. So who said digital needs to be the face on the box when actually we do promote and support constructive real-world learning? And I'd just like to thank Gary Price from La Trobe University, and also thanks to everyone today.
Eben, thank you very much.
Thanks, Kim.
Do you have one place where you would start if, someone's going to be teaching fully online tomorrow and they never have before? What's one thing that you'd advise that we do to help with those collaborative discussions?
Often, and this came up in an earlier talk, often the online teacher finds themselves in the deep end immediately. Now, the first thing I would advise is touch base with your students. You have your emails, their emails, touch base with them. It can take time unless you're and I'm lost for words, sorry. It's a format where you go in and it automatically sends emails. I've used it a couple of times, but it sometimes doesn't work because the formatting isn't quite so good. And make sure you write the student's name, connect with them, and ask them a bit about themselves, and to post online what their hobbies and interests are, what they do outside of the study environment. And then have a common interest topic. If you there's a tendency for teachers to go straight for the content. If you want to promote collaborative learning and a community of practice online, you need a general interest topic. And an example of that might be cats versus dogs, or yes, well, Hillary versus Trump, Donald Trump, and it gets students posting. That's great. Thanks, Kim.